Shadows of the past. The gentle patter of rain against the windows of the Pinnacle Hotel slowly transformed into a fierce drumming as the storm intensified. Dominic Foster stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the presidential suite, watching lightning split the darkening sky. His reflection stared back at him. A man barely 40 with prematurely silver-streaked dark hair, eyes the color of a stormy sea, and a jawline perpetually set in determination. "Mr. Foster? The staff has been notified about the potential weather emergency." Dominic turned to face his assistant, Jeffrey, a slender man with wire-rimmed glasses who had been with him since the early days of Horizon Technologies. "Thank you. You should head home before the roads flood." "Sir, there are several items on tomorrow's agenda that—" "They can wait," Dominic interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "The forecast is calling for the worst storm in a decade." After Jeffrey reluctantly departed, Dominic loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. He hadn't planned on staying at his own hotel tonight, but the board meeting had run late, and now the storm made travel inadvisable. The Pinnacle was his latest acquisition, a luxury hotel chain he'd purchased 6 months ago, more as an investment than from genuine interest. 3 floors below, Elise Morgan rushed through the grand ballroom, clipboard in hand, checking that all the preparations for tomorrow's charity gala were secure. At 32, she had worked her way up from waitress to become the hotel's most sought-after event coordinator. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped during her harried day. "Juanita, make sure all the flower arrangements are moved away from the windows," she called to one of the staff. "And can someone check if the backup generators have been tested?" "Already done, Ms. Morgan," replied the head of maintenance. "Standard procedure when there's a storm warning." Elise nodded, relieved. "Perfect. I think we're as ready as we can be." A crash of thunder so powerful it seemed to shake the building made everyone freeze. The lights flickered ominously. "All right, everyone," Elise announced. "Let's finish up and get home safely. The weather service is saying this could get much worse before morning." As the staff dispersed, Elise made her final rounds, checking each detail meticulously. The gala was raising funds for children who had lost parents to terminal illness, a cause that resonated deeply with her after losing her mother to cancer when she was just 16. This event needed to be perfect. The elevator dinged as she reached the lobby, and she looked up to see a tall figure step out. Even in casual clothes, a simple black button-down with the sleeves rolled up and tailored pants, there was no mistaking Dominic Foster. She had never spoken directly to the owner before, having only glimpsed him during his infrequent visits to the property. Another violent crack of thunder, and suddenly the lobby plunged into darkness. Emergency lights clicked on seconds later, casting everything in an eerie glow. "It appears we've lost power," came a deep voice from nearby. Elise squinted through the dim light. "Mr. Foster, are you all right?" "I'm fine," he replied, approaching her. "And you are?" "Elise Morgan, sir, event coordinator for tomorrow's Children's Hope Foundation Gala." Lightning illuminated his face for a brief moment. Handsome, but with a hardness around the eyes that suggested pain carefully locked away. She had heard the rumors about the tech billionaire. Brilliant but cold, ruthlessly efficient in business, and completely closed off in his personal life. "I see," he said, glancing around the darkened lobby. "It seems we might be here a while, Ms. Morgan." Outside, the storm unleashed its fury, rain hammering against the glass entrance doors with such force it seemed determined to break through. The wind howled like a living thing, angry and wild. Neither of them knew it yet, but as the city descended into darkness around them, this night would change everything. Thunder and whispers, the emergency lighting cast long shadows across the lobby as hotel staff hurried to distribute candles and flashlights to the few guests caught in the downstairs areas. Dominic watched with quiet approval as Elise took charge, her voice calm and reassuring as she directed employees and comforted anxious visitors. "The backup generator should kick in for essential systems within 20 minutes, she explained, to an elderly couple. "In the meantime, we've prepared the Sapphire Lounge with refreshments and extra blankets." When the lobby had emptied of everyone except the 2 of them, Dominic approached Elise. "You handle crisis well, Ms. Morgan." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, looking surprised at the compliment. "Thank you. It's part of the job. Events rarely go exactly as planned." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the massive windows, and both instinctively glanced outside. The street had become a river, water rushing down the asphalt while trees bent sideways in submission to the gale. "The weather service is reporting flash flooding throughout downtown," Dominic said, checking his phone. "The hotel seems to be the safest place tonight." Elise nodded, then frowned. "I should check on the ballroom preparations. With this level of storm, I'm concerned about water damage if any windows have been compromised." "I'll come with you," Dominic offered, surprising himself. Normally he would have retreated to his suite, leaving such matters to staff. Something about her competence, her lack of fawning attention to his status, intrigued him. They made their way up the grand staircase, their path illuminated by Elise's flashlight and the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. The ballroom was eerily beautiful in the darkness, tables draped in white linens, crystal centerpieces catching and refracting what little light existed. "Everything seems secure," Elise said with relief, walking the perimeter of the room. "The Children's Hope Foundation has been planning this event for months. Many of the children will be attending." "You seem personally invested," Dominic observed, helping her check the windows. Elise hesitated before answering. "I am. I lost my mother when I was 16. It changes you, losing a parent young." Dominic's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Yes, it does." They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, securing loose items and double-checking the windows. When they finished, Elise suggested they check the kitchen's refrigeration systems to ensure no food would spoil. "The backup generators should prioritize those," Dominic said, "but it's worth verifying." As they descended the service stairs, the building gave an ominous creak. Elise stumbled slightly, and Dominic's hand shot out to steady her, gripping her elbow. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them, and he quickly released her once she had regained her balance. "Thank you," she murmured, acutely aware of his proximity in the narrow stairwell. The kitchen was deserted, staff having been sent home before the worst of the storm hit. Emergency lights gave the stainless steel surfaces an otherworldly glow. Elise checked the refrigerators, relieved to find them still running. "The generators are working," she confirmed. Dominic nodded, then glanced at his watch. "It's nearly midnight. The storm isn't expected to abate until morning. We should probably find somewhere more comfortable to wait it out," Elise suggested. "The Sapphire Lounge has sofas, and we could light the fireplace." The lounge was intimate and elegant, with plush seating arranged around a marble fireplace. Dominic set about lighting the gas fire while Elise found a bottle of Cabernet and 2 glasses. "I hope you don't mind," she said, offering him a glass. "It seems like a night that calls for it." He accepted with a slight nod. "Indeed." They settled, on opposite ends of a sofa, the firelight creating a small bubble of warmth in the storm-ravaged night. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the rain and thunder. "How long have you worked for the Pinnacle?" Dominic eventually asked. 8 years. I started as a waitress while finishing my degree." She took a sip of wine. "And you?" I know you own Horizon Technologies, but the hotel chain is a recent acquisition, isn't it?" 6 months ago, he confirmed. "It was a sound investment opportunity." "Just business, then?" Something in her tone suggested disappointment. Dominic swirled his wine thoughtfully. "Most things in my life are just business these days, Ms. Morgan. Please, call me Elise." She studied him over the rim of her glass. "That sounds rather lonely." The directness of her observation caught him off guard. Most people wouldn't dare speak so frankly to him. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but loneliness can be predictable, safe." "Safer than what?" The question hung between them, simple yet profound. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating his face, for a moment, revealing not the billionaire, but simply a man carrying something heavy. "Safer than disappointment," he finally said. "Safer than loss." Elise nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. I know something about that too. As the fire crackled and the storm raged on, something shifted between them. A tiny crack in carefully constructed walls, an opening just wide enough for whispers to pass through. Dawn's first light. The night deepened around them as they talked, their conversation flowing more easily with each passing hour. The wine bottle emptied, and Elise found herself curled comfortably at her end of the sofa, shoes off, legs tucked beneath her. Dominic had loosened further as well, his posture less rigid, tie completely removed and collar unbuttoned. So, after college, I traveled for a year, Elise was saying. I had this idea that I needed to see the world before settling into a career. Where did you go? Dominic asked, genuinely interested. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a conversation that wasn't about business or obligations. Southeast Asia mostly. Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. Her eyes brightened with the memory. I taught English in a small village for 3 months. The children there had so little, but they were so joyful. It changed my perspective on what matters. And that led you to event planning? There was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity. Elise laughed softly. Not directly, but it did make me realize I wanted work that created moments of joy for people. There's something beautiful about crafting, experiences that become memories. Dominic nodded thoughtfully. I used to think that way about technology, creating tools that improved lives. Used to? He hesitated, then set his empty glass on the table. Somewhere along the way, it became more about metrics and market share. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting the room in a soft orange glow. Outside, the storm continued, though its fury had somewhat abated. The rhythmic drumming of rain created a cocoon around their conversation, insulating them from the world beyond. What happened? Elise asked quietly, sensing they were approaching the edges of whatever shadow haunted him. Dominic was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, becoming rougher, more vulnerable. 4 years ago I lost someone. He stared into the dying embers. My fiancée, Olivia. Elise remained silent, offering him space to continue or stop as he needed. She was a humanitarian architect, designing sustainable housing in disaster zones. A sad smile touched his lips. Brilliant, passionate, always challenging me to look beyond profit margins. He stood abruptly, moving to the window where lightning occasionally illuminated the flooded streets below. There was an earthquake in Peru. She went to help with emergency shelter solutions. His voice became clinical, as if distance could dull the pain. A building collapsed during an aftershock. She didn't make it out. I'm so sorry, Dominic, Elise said softly. He didn't turn from the window. The last conversation we had was an argument. I wanted her to postpone the trip. There had been warnings about continued seismic activity. She accused me of not respecting her work. His reflection in the glass showed a tightened jaw. 3 days later, she was gone. Elise rose from the sofa and moved to stand beside him, not quite touching, but close enough that he could feel her presence. Grief isn't linear, she said after a moment. When my mother died, I was angry for so long. At the cancer, at the doctors, at her for leaving me, at myself for the times I'd been a difficult teenager. Dominic turned slightly toward her. How did you move past it? I didn't, not completely. You don't move past grief. You move forward with it. She gazed out at the storm. Eventually, I realized that honoring her memory meant living fully, not getting stuck in the what-ifs. Something in her words reached a place in Dominic that had been locked away for years. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. The simple human connection nearly undid him. After Olivia died, I threw myself into work, he confessed. Built Horizon into what it is today, acquired companies, expanded globally, kept moving so I wouldn't have to feel. Elise squeezed his hand gently. And now? Now? He looked down at their joined hands. Now I'm standing in a dark hotel during a storm talking to someone who sees past the balance sheets and board meetings. And I'm terrified. Of what? Of feeling anything again. The admission cost him, she could tell. The first hint of dawn was appearing on the horizon, a faint lightening of the eastern sky visible between breaks in the clouds. The storm was finally beginning to subside. "Look," Elise whispered, nodding toward the window. "First light." They stood side by side, watching as darkness gradually surrendered to dawn. The rain had gentled to a soft patter, and the wind no longer howled like a wounded animal. "Thank you," Dominic said quietly, "for listening, for not offering platitudes." Elise turned to face him fully. Sometimes what we need most is someone who just witnesses our pain without trying to fix it. In the growing light, he studied her face, the compassion in her eyes, the gentle strength in her expression. Something long dormant stirred within him, frightening in its intensity but impossible to ignore. As the first ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the flooded city in a golden glow, Dominic realized that perhaps the storm had washed away more than just power lines and tree branches. Perhaps it had begun to clear away the debris he'd allowed to accumulate around his heart. Storms within. 3 days after the storm, Dominic sat in his office overlooking the Seattle skyline, staring unseeingly at the spreadsheets on his monitor. The city had largely recovered from the flooding, power had been restored to most areas, and business had resumed its relentless pace. Yet something had shifted within him, making it difficult to focus on quarterly projections and acquisition targets. A knock at his door broke his reverie. Jeffrey entered with a stack of documents requiring signatures. "The board is pleased with the Pinnacle's crisis management during the storm," his assistant reported. Apparently, the staff handled everything exceptionally well, particularly the Children's Hope Foundation Gala, which proceeded without issue once power was restored. Dominic's pen paused above a contract. "The gala went forward?" "Yes, sir. Apparently, the event coordinator, Ms. Morgan, I believe, worked through the night once power was restored to ensure everything was perfect. The foundation raised nearly double their expected amount." A faint smile touched Dominic's lips. "Is that so?" Jeffrey adjusted his glasses, puzzled by his employer's uncharacteristic interest in a hotel event. "Yes. Would you like me to get the detailed report?" "No, that won't be necessary." Dominic signed the remaining documents, then stood. "Clear my schedule for the afternoon. There's something I need to attend to personally." An hour later, he walked through the gleaming lobby of the Pinnacle Hotel. Several staff members did double takes at seeing the owner twice in 1 week. Previously, his visits had been months apart. At the events office, he found Elise deep in conversation with a bride-to-be, discussing floral arrangements with animated gestures. Her hair was down today, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore a simple navy dress that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. Dominic waited quietly until the consultation ended, watching as Elise reassured the nervous bride with genuine warmth. When the client departed, Elise looked up and froze momentarily upon seeing him. "Mr. Foster," she said, automatically reverting to formality. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Dominic," he corrected gently. "I heard the gala was a success." A smile brightened her face. "It was wonderful. The children had an amazing time and the foundation exceeded their fundraising goal. We had to work quickly after the power came back, but everyone pitched in." He nodded, suddenly uncertain why he had come. The ease they had found during the storm felt harder to recapture in the harsh light of day, with roles and expectations back in place. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner," he said finally, "to continue our conversation." Surprise flickered across her features, followed by something softer. "I'd like that." That evening, they dined at a small restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, far from the corporate settings and luxury hotels that defined Dominic's usual environment. The intimate space, with its mismatched chairs and local artwork, was Elise's suggestion. "The best seafood in Seattle that no one knows about," she had promised. As they shared plates of perfectly prepared salmon and locally foraged mushrooms, Dominic found himself speaking of things he rarely discussed: his childhood in a middle-class Boston neighborhood, his fascination with computers from an early age, the scholarship that had changed his life. "What about your father?" Elise asked, sipping her wine. "You mentioned losing your mother young, but not him." A shadow crossed Dominic's face. "He left when I was 8, started a new family in California." He shrugged slightly. "Last I heard, he was working construction in San Diego." "You don't stay in touch?" "No." The single syllable carried years of abandonment and disappointment. "Some bridges can't be rebuilt." Elise considered him thoughtfully. "Or perhaps you've never tried to cross them again." Her gentle challenge might have angered him coming from anyone else. But from her, it felt like care rather than criticism. As the evening progressed, Dominic realized how much he had missed: genuine connection, conversation that went beyond strategic advantages and business opportunities. Yet even as he felt drawn to Elise's warmth, doubts crept in like shadow tendrils. Walking her home along the waterfront, Dominic found himself growing quieter, retreating into his thoughts. "You've gone somewhere else," Elise observed softly as they paused to watch a ferry crossing the Sound, its lights shimmering on the dark water. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was thinking about Olivia." Elise nodded, giving him space to continue. "Part of me feels like I'm betraying her memory by—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the conflict within him. "By feeling something for someone else?" Elise finished gently. "Yes." He turned to face her fully. "And another part wonders if I'm simply repeating patterns, drawn to someone kind and passionate, only to eventually disappoint them with my focus on work, my inability to be what they need." "Dominic," Elise said carefully, "I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are, and I certainly don't expect you to have processed your grief on any timeline but your own." The understanding in her eyes nearly undid him. "What if I'm too broken, Elise? What if I've spent so long building walls that I don't know how to live without them?" "We're all broken in some way," she replied. "The question is whether we let those broken places become barriers or bridges." They had reached her apartment building, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and large windows. At her door, Dominic hesitated, the storm inside him still raging. "I need time," he said finally, "to sort through things, to be sure I'm not just seeking comfort in a moment of vulnerability." Instead of disappointment, her expression showed understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." As he walked back to his car alone, Dominic realized he was standing at a crossroads. Behind him lay the safety of isolation, the predictable pain of a life half-lived. Ahead was uncertain terrain, the risk of heartbreak, but also the possibility of redemption. For the first time in 4 years, he found himself willing to consider stepping into the unknown. After the rain, 2 weeks passed with no word from Dominic. Elise threw herself into work, coordinating 3 corporate events and a wedding, keeping her mind occupied during the days. But in quiet evenings, thoughts of their conversations during the storm and their dinner by the bay would return, leaving her wondering if she had imagined the connection between them. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Elise arrived at her office to find a small package on her desk. Inside was a carved wooden box containing a simple silver compass. The note read, "For helping me find my direction again. Coffee at Harborview Park, 5 p.m. today? D." Her heart quickened as she ran her fingers over the compass. Its needle pointed steadily north, unwavering in its purpose. When she arrived at the waterfront park that evening, Elise spotted Dominic sitting on a bench overlooking the Sound. He wore jeans and a gray sweater, a far cry from his usual business attire, and seemed lost in thought as he watched the waves. Something about him looked different, lighter somehow. "I was beginning to think you'd disappeared," she said as she approached. He stood, a smile warming his features. "Not disappeared, just figuring things out." He gestured to the bench. "Walk, With me? They strolled along the waterfront path, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Sailboats dotted the horizon, their white sails bright against the blue water. I went to Peru, Dominic said after they had walked in comfortable silence for a while. Elise glanced at him, surprised. Peru? He nodded. To the town where Olivia died. I'd never been. Couldn't bring myself to go after it happened. His voice was steady, though tinged with old pain. I visited the memorial they built for those lost in the earthquake, spoke with people who had worked with her. That must have been difficult, Elise said softly. It was, he admitted, but necessary. They told me stories about her, how she stayed late designing modifications to make the temporary shelters more comfortable for families, how she insisted on using local materials and teaching residents construction techniques they could use long-term. They paused at a viewpoint, leaning against the railing as a ferry glided past. I realized something important, Dominic continued. I've been preserving my grief like a monument, as if letting go would somehow dishonor her memory. But Olivia lived fully, passionately. She wouldn't have wanted anyone to stop living because of her death, especially not me. Elise reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. That sounds like a profound realization. It was. He turned to face her fully. I also realized something else. Meeting you wasn't just chance. It was a reminder that life continues, that connection is still possible even after loss. And what about those walls you mentioned? She asked, her voice gentle. The ones you've spent years building? Dominic's expression softened. I'm learning that walls can be dismantled stone by stone. It doesn't happen overnight, but... He squeezed her hand. I'm willing to do the work if you're willing to be patient with the process. I can be patient, Elise said, her smile reaching her eyes. As long as you promise to be honest. With yourself and with me. About where you are in that process, I promise. The words felt like a vow, simple but profound. They continued walking as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting everything in a golden glow. Dominic told her about his plans to establish a foundation in Olivia's name, funding sustainable architecture in vulnerable communities. Elise shared her dream of eventually starting her own event planning company, focused on charitable causes. As dusk settled around them, they found a small cafe near the water's edge. Over steaming mugs of coffee, their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and occasional laughter. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people discovering each other one story at a time. I have something to confess, Dominic said as they walked back toward the park where they had met. The night of the storm, when the power went out, I could have gone to my suite immediately. The emergency lighting was working in the elevators. Elise raised an eyebrow. So you chose to stay in the lobby? Something about you caught my attention, he admitted. Your competence, your calm in the crisis, I was curious. And now, she asked, stopping beneath a streetlight that illuminated her face in a soft glow. Now I'm grateful, he said simply. For whatever twist of fate or weather pattern brought us together that night. As if on cue, a light rain began to fall. Nothing like the violent storm that had first thrown them together, just a gentle spring shower that sparkled in the streetlights. Neither made a move to seek shelter. They say Seattle has 100 different kinds of rain, Elise remarked, tilting her face upward to feel the cool drops on her skin. And I've been seeing them all as the same. Inconveniences, obstacles, Dominic replied thoughtfully. Maybe that's been my problem all along. Seeing the storms of life as only destructive, never transformative. Elise turned to him, raindrops clinging to her eyelashes like tiny diamonds. And now? Instead of answering with words, Dominic gently cupped her face in his hands. The kiss was tender, unhurried, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, the look they shared held both promise and understanding. Now, he said softly, I'm learning to dance in the rain. 6 months later, the Olivia Reed Foundation launched its first major project, a community center in Peru designed to withstand seismic activity while honoring local architectural traditions. At the opening ceremony, Dominic stood at the podium, Elise by his side, as he spoke about transformation, second chances, and the beauty that can emerge after even the darkest storms. That night, under a star-filled Peruvian sky, he presented Elise with a small velvet box containing a ring of twisted, silver bands that resembled flowing water. "This isn't a proposal, not yet," he clarified as she gasped. "It's a promise to continue dismantling walls, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, to build something new together day by day." Elise slipped the ring onto her finger, then wrapped her arms around him. "Promise accepted," she whispered against his shoulder. Above them, clouds parted to reveal a full moon, its light silvering the landscape. The storms, both literal and metaphorical, had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, ready for new growth and possibilities previously unimagined. In learning to embrace the rain, they had discovered the rainbow that follows.